Once again on the battlefield he was eager for the fight, and better fortune for a time lay before him. Zeus had now Zeus had by now remembered his promise to Thetis to avenge Achilles' wrong. He ordered all the other immortals to stay in Olympus. He himself went down to earth to help the Trojans. When it went hard with the Greeks, then it went hard with the Greeks. Their great champion was far away. Achilles sat alone in his tent, brooding over his wrongs. The great Trojan War, the great Trojan champion, had never before shown himself so brilliant and so brave. Hector seemed irresistible, tamer of horses, like the Trojans always called him, and he drove his car through the Greek ranks as if the same spirit animated steeds and driver. His glancing helm was everywhere, and one gallant warrior after another fell beneath his horrible bronze spear. When evening ended the battle, the Trojans had driven the Greeks back almost to their ships. There was rejoicing and joy that night, but grief and despair in the Greek camp. Amaganon himself was all for giving up and sailing back to Greece. Nestor, however, who was the oldest among the chieftains, and therefore the wisest, wiser even than the shrewd Odysseus, spoke out boldly and told Amaganon that if he had not angered Achilles, they would have had they would have they would not have been defeated. Try to find some way of appeasing him, he said, instead of going home disgraced. All applauded the advice of Agamemnon confessed, and Agamemnon confessed that he had acted like a fool. He would send Briscus back, he promised them, and with her many other splendid gifts, and he begged Odysseus to take his offer to Achilles. Odysseus and the two chieftains chose to accompany him. Odysseus and the two chieftains chosen to accompany him found the hero with his friend Patroclus, who of all men on earth was dearest to him. Achilles welcomed them courteously and set food and drink before them. But when they told him why they had come and all the rich gifts that would be his if he would yield, and begged him to have pity on his harsh pressed countrymen, they received an absolute refusal. Not all of the treasures of Egypt could buy him in, he told them. He was sailing home, and they would be wise to do the same. But all rejected that counsel when Odysseus brought back the answer. The next day they went into battle with the desperate courage of brave men concerned. Again they were driven back, until they stood fighting on the beach where their ships were drawn up. But help was at hand. Hera had laid her plans. She saw Zeus sitting on Mount Ida, watching the Trojans conquer, and she thought how she detested them. But she knew well that she could get the better of him only in one way. She must go to him looking so lovely that he could not resist her. When he took her in his arms, she would pour sweet sleep upon him, and he would forget the Trojans. So she did. She went to her chamber and used every art she knew to make herself beautiful beyond compare. Last of all, she borrowed Aphrodite's girdle, wherein were all her enchantments, and with this added charm she appeared before Zeus. As he saw her, love overcame his heart, so that he thought no more of his promise to Thetis. At once the battle turned in favor of the Greeks. Ajax hurled Hector to the ground, although before he could wound him, Aeneas lifted him and bore him away. With Hector gone, the Greeks were able to drive out the Trojans far back from the ships, and Troy might have been sacked that very day if Zeus had not awakened. He leaped up and saw the Trojans in flight and Hector lying, gasping, on the plain. All was clear to him, and he turned fiercely to Hera. This was her doing, he said. Her crafty, crooked ways. He was half-minded to give her then and there a beating. When it came to that kind of fighting, Hera knew she was helpless. She promptly denied that she had anything to do with the Trojans' defeat. It was all Poseidon, she said. And indeed, the sea god had been helping the Greeks contrary to Zeus's orders, but only because she had begged him. However, Zeus was glad enough of an excuse not to lay hands on her. He sent her back to Olympus and summoned Iris, the rainbow messenger, to carry his command to Poseidon, to withdraw from the field. Sullenly, the sea god obeyed, and once more the tide of battle turned against the Greeks. Apollo had revived the fainting Hector and breathed into him surpassing power. Before the two, the god and the hero, the Greeks were like a flock of frightened sheep driven by mountain lions. They fled in confusion to the ships, and the wall they had built to defend them went down like a sand wall. Children leap up on the shore and then scatter in their play. The Trojans were like were almost the Trojans were almost near enough to set the ships on fire. The Greeks hopelessly thought only of dying bravely. Patroclus, Achilles' beloved friend, saw the rout with horror. Not even for Achilles' sake could he stay longer away from the battle. You can keep your wrath while your countrymen go down in ruin, he cried to Achilles. I cannot. Give me your armor. If they think I am you, the Trojans may pause and the worn-out Greeks have a breathing space. You and I are fresh. We might yet drive back the enemy, but if you will sit nursing your anger, at least let me have the armor. As he spoke, one of the Greek ships burst into flame. That way they can cut off the army's retreat, Achilles said. Go, take my armor, my men too, and defend the ships. I cannot go. I am a man dishonored. For my own ships, if the battle comes near them, I will fight. I will not fight for men who have disgraced me. So, but Patroclus put on the splendid armor of all the Trojans knew and feared, and my led the Myrmidons, Achilles' men, to the battle. At the first onset of this new band of warriors, the Trojans wavered. They thought Achilles led them on, and indeed for a time Patroclus fought as gloriously as that great hero himself could have done. But at last he met Hector face to face, and his doom was sealed as surely as a boar is doomed when he faces a lion. Hector's spear gave him a mortal wound and his soul fled from his body down to the house of Hades. Then Hector stripped his armor from him and casting his own aside, put it on. It seemed as though he had taken on too Achilles' strength, and no man of the Greeks could stand before him. Evening came that puts an end to battle. Achilles sat by his tent. Achilles sat by his tent waiting for Patroclus to return, but instead he saw old Nestor's son running toward him. Fleet-footed and tactless, he was weeping hot tears as he ran. Bitter tidings, he cried out. Patroclus is fallen, and Hector has his armor. Grief took hold of Achilles. Down in the sea caves his mother knew his sorrow and came up to try to comfort him. "I will no longer live among men," he told her, "if I do not make Hector pay with his death for Patroclus is dead." Then Thetis, weeping, bade him remember that he himself was fated to die straightway after Hector. "So may I do," Achilles answered. "I, who did not help my comrade in his sore need, I will kill the destroyer of him I loved. Then I will accept death when it comes." Thetis did not attempt to hold him back. "Only wait until morning," she said, "and you will not go unarmed to battle. I will bring you arms fashioned by the divine armorer, the god Hephaestus himself." Marvelous arms they were when Thetis brought them, worthy of their maker, such as no man on earth had ever borne. The Myrmidons gazed at them with awe, and a flame of fierce joy blazed in Achilles' eye as he put them on. Then at last he left the tent in which he had sat so long, and went down to where the Greeks were gathered, a wretched company. Diogenes grievously wounded, Odysseus, Agamemnon, and many another. He felt shame before them, as he told him he saw his own exceeding folly in allowing the loss of a mere girl to make him forget everything else. But that was over. He was ready to lead them as before. Let them prepare at once for the battle. The chieftains applauded joyfully, but Odysseus spoke for all when he said they must first take their fill of food and wine, for fasting men made poor fighters. "Our comrades lie dead on the field, and you call to food," Achilles answered scornfully. "Down my throat shall go neither bite nor sup until my dear comrade is avenged." And to himself he said, "O dearest of friends, for want of you I cannot eat, I cannot drink." Then the others had When the others had satisfied their hunger, he led the attack. This was the last fight between the two great champions, as all the immortals knew. They also knew how it would turn out. Father Zeus hung his golden balances and set in one the lot of Hector's death and in the other that of Achilles. Hector's lot sank down. It was appointed that he should never die. Nevertheless, the victory was long in doubt. The Trojans under Hector fought as brave men before the walls of their home. Even the great river of Troy, with which the gods call Xanthus and men Scamander, took part and strove to drown Achilles as he crossed its waters. In vain, for nothing could check him as he rushed on slaughtering all in his path, and seeking everywhere for Hector. The gods by now were fighting too, as hotly as the men, and Zeus, sitting apart in Olympus, laughed pleasantly to himself when he saw god matched against god. Athena felling Ares to the ground, Hera seizing the bow of Artemis from her shoulders, and the box and the boxing her ears with it this way and that. Poseidon provoking Apollo with taunting words to strike him first. The sun god refused the challenge. He knew it was of no use now to fight for Hector. By this time the great Scaean gates of Troy had been flung wide, for the Trojans at last were in full flight, and were crowding into the town. Only Hector stood immovable before the wall. From the gates old Priam, his father, and his mother, Hecuba, cried to him to come within to save himself. But he did not heed. He was thinking, "I led the Trojans. Their defeat is my fault. Then am I to spare myself? And yet, what if I were to lay down shield and spear, and go tell Achilles that he will give Helen back and half to Troy's treasures with her?" Useless. He would but kill me unarmed as if I were a woman. Better to join battle with him now, even if I die. On came Achilles, glorious as the sun when he rises. Beside him was Athena, but before but Hector was alone. Apollo had left him to his fate. As the pair drew near he turned and fled. 3 times around the wall of Troy, and pursuer ran with flying feet. It was Athena who made Hector halt. She appeared beside him in the shape of his brother, and with this ally, as he thought, Hector faced Achilles. He cried out to him, "If I kill you, I will give back your body to your friends, and do you the same to me." But Achilles answered, "Madman, there are no covenants between sheep and wolves, nor between you and me." So saying, he hurled his spear. It missed its aim, but Athena brought it back. Then Hector struck with a true aim. The spear hit the center of Achilles' shield, but to what good? That armor was magical and could not be pierced. He turned quickly to Deiphobus, Deiphobus, Deiphobus to get a spear, but he was not there. Then Hector knew the truth. Athena had tricked him, and there was no way of escape. The gods have summoned me to death, he thought. At least I will not die without a struggle, but in some great deed of arms which men yet to be born will tell each other. He drew his sword, his only weapon now, and rushed upon his enemy. But Achilles had a spear, the one Athena had recovered for him. Before Hector could approach, he knew, he who knew well the armor taken by Hector from the dead Patroclus, aimed at an opening in it near the throat, and drove the spear point in. Hector fell dying at last. With his last breath he prayed, "Give back my body to my father and my mother." "No prayers from you to me, you dog," Achilles answered. "I would that I could have myself devour raw your flesh for the evil you have brought upon me." Then Hector's soul flew forth from his body and was gone to Hades, bewailing his fate, leaving vigor and youth behind. Achilles stripped the bloody armor from the corpse, while the Greeks ran up to wonder how tall he was as he lay there, and how noble he to look upon. But Achilles' mind was on other matters. He pierced the feet of the dead man and fastened them with thongs at the back of his chariot, letting the head trail. When he lashed his horses and round the walls of Troy, he dragged all that was left of glorious Hector. At last, his fierce soul was satisfied with vengeance. He stood beside the body of Patroclus and said, "Hear me, even in the house of Hades. I have dragged Hector behind my chariot, and I will give him to the dogs to devour beside your funeral pyre." Up in Olympus there was a dissension. This abuse of the dead displeased all the immortals except Hera and Athena and Poseidon. Especially it displeased Zeus. He sent Iris to Priam to order him to go without fear to Achilles to retrieve Hector's body, bearing a rich ransom. She was to tell him that violent as Achilles was, he was not really evil, but one who would treat properly a suppliant. Then the aged king heaped a car with splendid treasures, the best in Troy, and went over the plain to the Greek camp. Hermes met him, looking like a Greek youth, and offering himself as a guide to Achilles' tent. So accompanied the old man past the guards, and came into the presence of the man who had killed and maltreated his son. He clasped his knees and kissed his hands as he did so. Achilles felt awe, and so did all the others there. Looking strangely upon one another. Remember, Achilles, Priam said, your own father, of like years with me, and like me, wretched for want of a son. Yet I am by far more to be pitied, who have braved what no man on earth ever did before, to stretch out my hand to the slayer of my son. Grief stirred within Achilles' heart as he listened. Gently he raised the old man. Sit by me here, he said, and let our sorrow lie quiet in our hearts. Evil is all men's lot, but yet we must keep courage. Then he bade his servants wash and anoint Hector's body, and cover it with a soft robe, so that Priam should not see it. Frightful, mangled as it is, frightfully mangled as it is, and to be unable to keep back his wrath. He feared for his own self-control if Priam vexed him. How many days do you desire to make this funeral? He asked. For so long I will keep the Greeks back from battle. Then Priam brought Hector home, mourned in Troy as never another. Even Helen wept. The other Trojans upbraid me, she said, but always I had comfort from you through the gentleness of your spirit and your gentle words. You only were my friend. 9 days they lamented him. Then they laid him on a lofty pyre and set it to fire. When all was burned, they quenched the flame with wine and gathered the bones into a golden urn, shrouding them in soft purple. They set the urn in a hollow grave and piled great stones over it. This was the funeral for Hector, tamer of horses, and with it the Iliad ends.